AP 120, Chapter 14, Topics, Innate Immunity. So we have various ways, various defenses that will protect us against infection, aka protect us when we are exposed to disease-causing agents, also known as pathogens, that can come in many different forms and cause infections within the body, infections that are known by various names for various infectious diseases. So these pathogens can be viruses. Viruses are tiny nucleic acid protein structures that can cause infection. They can cause such things as influenza, colds, Ebola, Zika, coronavirus. Then there are bacteria, bacterial pathogens. These are tiny cells, tinier than our own cells. They can cause things like strep throat, gonorrhea, botulism, cholera. We have protozoans. Protozoans are organisms, single-cell organisms usually, that are about the same size as our cells. They are eukaryotic like our cells, pretty similar, making it harder to fight them with medications because we don't want to damage our own cells. They can cause things like malaria, sleeping sickness, giardia. And then there's also possible infection by worms, by actual tiny little animals. These include tapeworms, pinworms, hookworms, and heartworms. So we have two types of defenses, two big category types of defenses. We have innate defenses, also known as non-specific defenses. They can guard against most any pathogen. They are always present. They can act quickly. But again, they are non-specific. They include species resistance, mechanical barriers, chemical barriers, natural killer cells, inflammation, phagocytosis, and fever. And then we also have adaptive defenses, also known as specific defenses. This is often what people talk about when they talk about having immunity, is when our adaptive defenses are turned on against that very specific target. So our adaptive defenses will lead to an attack against a specific pathogen, hopefully giving us immunity, but at the very least destroying the pathogen so that we no longer suffer from the disease. And these are carried out by lymphocytes that are able to recognize the specific invading pathogen. And unfortunately, usually the first time we are exposed to and suffer from this type of infection, we get sick. So we develop the immunity maybe only after getting sick. So we're going to focus on the innate defenses, the non-specific defenses, and they're broken down into first line and second line defenses. First line is mechanical barriers that exist before the pathogen officially is in the body. And then second line defenses, things we can do after it invades deeper into our body. So some first line defenses, species resistance. Basically, pathogens tend to target specific species. So say something that makes a human really sick would not cause a frog to get sick, and vice versa. So we are immune to many diseases because we are not the target species. Our body temperature is different, or the chemical levels of electrolytes in our blood is different, and so on. Then there are mechanical barriers. The best one is unbroken skin. So our skin is a great barrier to prevent pathogens from invading our body. Also, the skin is hair, which also can provide a little bit of protection. Our mucous membranes in our lining our eye, nasal cavity, oral cavity, anal cavity, etc. They also provide a mechanical barrier, although they're not as effective as skin. But the mucous membranes, of course, produce mucus, which can act as a block or can be a material to pull the pathogens away from the surfaces of those structures. Also, tears and sweat are great for washing away pathogens. And then we have some chemical barriers, chemicals that will help protect us by killing or weakening the pathogens. So for instance, the highly acidic environment is the stomach. That is there specifically to destroy pathogens. The acids in our stomach isn't to break down our food, it is to destroy pathogens that was in our food. Also, there's a compound called lysozyme found in many of our secretions, such as tears, saliva, sweat, that help to neutralize, to destroy at least some pathogens. Within the body, our cells are able to produce a kind of chemical called interferons. Interferons serve as an antiviral signal. So this second line defense, basically when, say, a cell lining our respiratory tract gets infected by a pathogen like coronavirus, that infected cell, poor sad infected cell, is going to produce interferons and release them, and these interferons will go to neighboring cells and warn them that there are viruses out there. And then those neighboring cells can start producing antiviral enzymes to protect themselves. So this is sort of a kind of communication. One cell got infected by a virus, it's lost, it's going to be destroyed, it's going to die, it is sad, but it also sends out interferons to say, hey, everybody, danger, danger, and the other cells can then try to stimulate protective mechanisms to keep themselves safe. Also, the interferons stimulate natural killer cells. Natural killer cells will show up, see the infected cell, and destroy it. Because natural killer cells destroy abnormal body cells. Our own cells that are infected will be destroyed by natural killer cells. There's also a variety of proteins within the bloodstream. They're called complement. The complement proteins are able to do many things, including destroying bacteria by punching a hole into them. It can stimulate inflammation, which attracts and enhances phagocytosis and brings in more leukocytes to the site. Again, the complement proteins are already in our blood's plasma. And so when activated and they cascade out, one thing these complement proteins can do, again, is punch holes into the bacteria, killing the bacteria. Natural killer cells, these are lymphocytes that will destroy any abnormal body cell. A cell infected by something or an abnormal cell that is, say, becoming cancerous. The natural killer cells will secrete proteins called perforins, which punch holes into the abnormal cell. And it also releases chemicals to enhance inflammation, because a sign of abnormal cells means that something's going wrong in the area, and inflammation will bring more white blood cells to help target the problem. And currently, there's a lot of cutting-edge research into cancer treatments that are trying to harness the natural killer cells as a way to fight cancers. Inflammation, again, very important. Inflammation is basically when there is a site of injury or infection. A variety of things will occur. There will be dilation of blood vessels, bringing in more blood, more fluids. This increased blood volume affects the area, causing it to get red, causing it to swell, causing it to get warmer. And also, in this process, bring in more leukocytes, more white blood cells. Obviously, if we get punctured, our skin gets ruptured in some way, pathogens will get in through that broken area of the skin. And so by bringing more leukocytes to that location, they can fight the pathogens and stop the infection, maybe even stopping it before there is any sign of disease. Eventually, of course, where the injury happens, there's going to be blood clotting to stop the bleeding, because obviously we don't want to bleed out. And then eventually fibroblasts will show up. If they find that there is a major infection still going on, they will form a connective tissue structure around the site of infection, isolating it, trying to prevent it from spreading, which is another important function. So again, inflammation is just our body's way to bring more leukocytes to a site of injury, to a site of infection. And as a consequence, inflammation leads to swelling, redness, heat, and pain. And inflammation is useful for a short period of time, but chronic inflammation can cause major problems. Phagocytosis, as we know, there are leukocytes that will go around engulfing any sort of pathogen, anything abnormal. So these are the neutrophils and the macrophages. So they will show up at a site of injury, attracted by the chemicals released by the damaged cells, and that attraction is called chemotaxis. And the neutrophils will engulf smaller things, bacteria and viruses. Macrophages will target larger things, some bacteria, things bound by antibodies, so viruses, chemicals, bacteria bound by antibodies, and also cellular debris. So between the two, they help to clean up the site and hopefully get rid of the pathogens. Fever. Turns out fever is a powerful protection against infection. Pathogens, bacteria especially, have evolved to prefer our body temperature of 98.7 degrees Fahrenheit, since that is what we normally are at. And so by raising our overall body temperature, this will make it more difficult for the bacteria to grow. So it interferes with bacterial growth by not being the ideal temperature for them. Also, the increase in body temperature causes a decrease in iron in the blood. So now there are less nutrients in the blood for the bacteria, further inhibiting their growth. And then, of course, we have the phagocytic cells, macrophages, neutrophils. Turns out they are actually slightly better when they are at a higher functioning in an environment with a higher temperature. So when we have a fever, our neutrophils and macrophages are better at doing their job. And so fevers are caused by our own body to try to fight infections. Now, of course, a fever can get too high. So if someone has a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit or greater, you should definitely seek medical assistance immediately. And that is it for this part of chapter 14.